Hello, and welcome to the Future President Podcast. It is now officially 100 days, over 100 days into the Trump presidency, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis has published a report projecting a real decline in GDP for the first quarter of 2025, the first decline in 3 years. And before we get into it, I want to shout out my new website, paxamericana.my.canva.site. We will eventually move to a real domain, and I hope to eventually have viewers be able to submit their articles that I can edit and look at to the website. I'm hoping it to be like an opinion and news website. And there's already one article on there that I wrote for the website called Populism, a Brief Modern Analysis. So again, that is paxamericana.my.canva.site if you want to check it out. All right, let's talk about the quarter one economic decline. So, as I've stated, the Bureau of Economic Analysis has reported a decline in real GDP. More specifically, they've reported a decline at a rate of 0.3%, following a real GDP increase of 2.4% in the final quarter of 2024. According to the BO website, this happened because of a rapid increase in imports. But why do imports decrease GDP? If you're unfamiliar with economics, GDP is a measure of domestic production, not foreign production. So if people are buying from other countries, the products they're buying don't contribute to their country's GDP, but the GDP of the exporting country from which they bought. So let's say I'm buying maple syrup from Canada. I really don't like maple syrup, to be completely honest, and I don't like Canadians. But let's say I do. I buy some maple syrup from Canada. Then I'm contributing to Canada's GDP, not America's. So now those foreign products obviously can't be considered part of domestic production, so they're generally subtracted from the total spending calculation that economists use to track GDP. But then again, a lot of people are wondering, well, why are the imports going up if the retaliatory tariffs that have already been enacted by countries like China are making foreign goods more expensive? Well, that's because people project that it will soon get more expensive. So I would say imports are going up because, to put it in perspective, imports are basically going up because American producers are worried that the prices are about to go up as a result of Trump's tariffs. So you know how he's paused them for, I believe, 90 days. People are basically, producers and the economy are basically stocking up for 90 days before those tariffs are meant to be enacted, if they are. Nevertheless, though, it is still an economic decline. So, again, what is the real idea behind the Trump trade strategy? And I kind of almost touched on it in the last episode, but I really kind of overlooked it. So, the whole idea behind the Trump trade plan, ostensibly, is to create domestic jobs, specifically manufacturing jobs. But this just doesn't happen because of tariffs. So while tariffs, they reduce foreign competition, they still increase the costs of production, the input costs, and lead to, of course, retaliatory tariffs. So for an example of this was the original OG Trump administration's China trade war. So the Federal Reserve Board described an actual loss in employment in the manufacturing sector as a result of OG Trump's tariffs. And I quote, "We find that tariff increases enacted since early 2018 are associated with relative reductions in U.S. manufacturing employment and relative increases in producer prices. In terms of manufacturing employment, rising input costs and retaliatory tariffs account for the negative relationship, and the contribution from these channels more than offsets a small positive effect from import production." So more specifically, the statistics they're citing are that there was a 0.4% growth in the manufacturing jobs from the isolated effects of reducing foreign competition, a contraction of 2% as a result of increased costs of production, and another contraction of 1.1% as a result of retaliatory tariffs, which totals to a overall decline in manufacturing employment of 2.7%. So no, tariffs don't lead to employment. They actually reduce employment and create economic hardship. And in history, you can find tariffs creating economic damage anywhere from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, the one that sort of accentuated the Great Depression under Herbert Hoover, from even in the modern day, North Korea's Juche policy, self-reliance policy, which ended in the famine of the 90s for North Korea. And still, it still continues today. But I mean, you really don't need to be Thomas Sowell to understand this, though. Another supposed reason, though, Trump is doing these tariffs is for the reduction of foreign influence, specifically, say, Chinese influence. And this notion sort of relies on, well, this is sort of an anti-globalist, sort of self-sufficient, independent notion of trade, otherwise known as autarky. So, autarky is basically the political and economic idea that self-sufficiency and avoiding dependence on other political entities leads to ultimately favorable outcomes. So, favorable to who? And I'll get to that. So, autarky is known to cause economic hardship. So, I can give the example of the Great Depression in North Korea, as I already have. There's also the example of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union practicing autarky. The Soviet Union less so in its later years, but more so in its earlier years. But more specifically, this is because, according to Britannica, autarkic systems, and I quote, autarkic systems are the opposite of liberal economic systems which encourage the free flow of goods and services. Adam Smith, the 18th century Scottish philosopher who is also considered to be the father of modern economics, was one of the first modern thinkers to question the benefits of autarkic policies. In his major work, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, he argued that mercantilist policies followed by the British Empire were detrimental to economic growth, and that free trade system in which countries specialized in producing goods in which they had held an absolute advantage because of superior productive capacity would generate more wealth. So, in other words, if a country is selling what it is specialized in and best at producing and buys from countries that are more efficient in producing certain other products, it kind of creates a win-win system. So this is the economic principle of comparative advantage, if you've ever heard of that. And it's why you have countries like Taiwan, for example, they'll specialize in, say, microchips, right? But the effectiveness of the comparative advantage principle and the interdependence of global economies means that autarky is not only economically defective, but also it can sort of create radicalization, if you think about it, because it fosters an environment where the only competition and economic activity that occurs within a nation is within the nation. There's no competition from the outside. It's sort of closed in. So that also means that economic outcomes and economic activity can be fully dictated by the government, which can be problematic if the said government is trying to enrich itself and create an extractive economic system. It's worth noting, though, that authoritarian nations attempt autarky just as a result of them being authoritarian, so they can share less influence from foreign powers. So it's not always the other way around, as I just described. And this can make you wonder, well, what are the tariffs really for then? So I speculate, and I only say this because they don't really seem to serve any other purpose. It could just be that Trump is using the tariffs to enrich himself and his coalition and put him in a more politically powerful position in the manner I just described. It seems that Trump is hijacking especially right-wing fears of a sort of globalist establishment that sort of neglects or destroys America, hopes to neglect or destroy American values and individual liberty. Though with the tariffs, it appears he's using this perception for the actual subversion of American liberty, but just in a more nationalistic and patriotic rather than globalist manner. But of course, it's kind of hard to say. On a separate note, today is May Day, and also International Workers' Day, and there have been some protests against the Trump administration, against his tariffs, his government cuts, his illegal deportations. And according to the AP News, cities around the world, from America, Taiwan, Japan, Italy, you name it, have been protesting basically the whole policy, the agenda of the Trump administration. So since we've already discussed the tariffs and why people may have a reason to be upset over them, I kind of want to discuss more the illegal immigration and deportation issue, which has been emphasized a lot in the national protests for International Workers' Day. So to summarize the whole immigration situation that's going on right now, in case you haven't heard, essentially the Trump administration has contracted with the president of El Salvador to hide to keep illegal immigrants in detention facilities within the country of El Salvador. Of course, the most notable case of this in recent memory was Kilmar Abrego Garcia. If you're unaware, Garcia was a Maryland father who was detained by ICE recently due to his supposed connections with MS-13. He does not have those connections in actuality, but he was sent to El Salvador, where he had a protection order, despite having a protection order not to be sent to El Salvador, which was ignored by the Trump administration, and the Supreme Court ordered that he be sent back and that his release be permitted back into the United States for due process hearings, and he is yet to do so. So there's been a lot of protests regarding that recently, and also just the fact that he's been doing these deportations in the first place, and he's been using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which, as you can imagine, some might consider antiquated, and has also been used, just to point it out, to intern Japanese Americans during World War II. It's the same law. But according to AP News, the website for the May Day protest reads, quote, "Everyone deserves respect and dignity, no matter who they are, where they were born, or what language they speak," unquote. The May Day protest website says, requote, "Immigrants are workers, and workers are immigrants. Our fight for fair wages, safe workplaces, and dignity on the job is the same fight for immigrant justice." Okay, let's be serious about illegal immigration. It is true that fundamental sectors of the American economy, at the moment, and they have been for decades at this point, are predicated on the services of illegal immigrants. So notable ones that come to mind is construction and agriculture. And keep in mind, are those working conditions regulated or even safe? Oftentimes, no, because they're not documented and they aren't technically subject to those workers' rights. This is just to say that illegal immigrants provide essential services to the American economy, not that the conditions in which they do so are necessarily moral. This makes illegal immigration more of a net positive for the American economy, and illegal immigrants usually contribute to society as any naturalized citizen would to search for opportunity. That said, though, a completely open border with potentially nefarious actors, think like drug lords, mafia guys, the people that Trump claims are the only ones coming through the border, is problematic. And there are genuine cultural and economic challenges in integrating immigrants within a society, which is why immigration should be legal in every circumstance. There should be no illegal immigration. This effectively means just simplifying the rules and the barriers of entry into the country, that might otherwise incentivize somebody to migrate illegally and face the deplorable working conditions and poverty wages aforementioned. This would probably promote overall migration and contribute to the positive economic effects that immigrants have had, while keeping in mind the working conditions. However, those who choose to come in illegally should be offered paths to citizenship anyway. And if they don't want to undertake those paths, then deportation may be a consideration. But I would exhaust every available measure before, you would deport them. But of course, let's be responsible here. Let's address the counter argument. So the Trump administration obviously advocates for a much different approach. So it seems in broad terms they simply want to deport immigrants who come in illegally. Just point blank, that's it. And there's many arguments against excessive immigration and illegal immigration, generally speaking. The commonly cited points among the Trump administration are that illegal immigration and excessive immigration lead to less wages for naturalized Americans. They lead to greater crime, sometimes even overpopulation. However, immigrants do not reduce wages. They commit no more crime than the average American, and they're actually a rather helpful solution to America's crisis of population decline and aging, which closed-off countries like China face in a vacuum. So, as it pertains to the most often discussed point of wages, well, often it may be crime, depending on what you've listened to. The Brookings Institute explains, quote, although many are concerned that immigrants compete against Americans for jobs, the most recent economic evidence suggests that, on average, immigrant workers increase the opportunities and incomes of Americans. Based on a survey of the academic literature, economists do not tend to find that immigrants cause any sizable decrease in wages and employment of U.S.-born citizens, and instead may raise wages and lower prices in the aggregate. This is because as the article later explains, and as I've already mentioned, immigrants aren't taking jobs that Americans would otherwise work. They're taking the often kinesthetic, sort of hands-on jobs in agriculture and construction, the really sort of rough, gritty jobs. So that's why it's not contributing to a decrease in wages for the average American, generally speaking. And also, the claim that illegal immigrants are causing any sort of profound amount of crime, particularly in proportion to other Americans, is sort of a thoroughly debunked notion. So, according to the Cato Institute, and they conducted a report in Texas that found that, quote, in 2018, the illegal immigrant criminal conviction rate was 782 per 100,000 illegal immigrants, 535 per 100,000 legal immigrants, and 1,422 per 100,000 native-born Americans. The illegal immigrant conviction rate was 45% below that of native-born Americans in Texas. But moving on to sort of like a different point. So the explanation I would consider more of kind of a good faith explanation is that they may argue that an entirely open border with immigrants who don't speak English or who do not wish to integrate into American culture and remain in their sort of social or ethnic clique, could create a potentially disastrous scenario with potential racial, linguistic, religious, and cultural conflict in the United States. Think, say, like Austria-Hungary after the First World War, and throughout the sort of Victorian era period. The sort of the classic failure of multiculturalism example. So it's to say that multiculturalism can only work if there are sort of shared, common, axiomatic values amongst the people of a nation. And in this case, for America, it would probably be democracy, the checks and balances, free speech, and the like. And to me, this argument's relatively grounded, but I don't think it's necessarily relevant to most of the immigrants, both legal and illegal, who are coming into the country. If it seems like most of them are coming into America looking for opportunity and prosperity, and they admire America as a place for opportunity with an inclusive political system where, if they wish to, they can make their voice heard. Of course, after they've been a resident for a decade or so. And unlike their probable country of origin, which is likely to be, of course, more politically unstable. Think Venezuela or some other unstable Central American country, for example. However, if they don't support these sort of general values and principles of American life, if they were hypothetically to only come to America to resist it and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, at that point, deportation may be considered a sort of suitable option, in my opinion. However, I don't think that the deportation should be, to example, for an El Salvadorian prison where they never wanted to be in the first place, You want to treat these people at least with some decency and respect. But it would have to be to their home country, and most definitely with due process, unlike they're doing with Mr. Garcia. However, of course, the vast majority of immigrants in America do not fall in this category. This is why it doesn't make sense to deport men like Kamala Garcia. So, like, he was just a guy trying to make a life in America and find opportunity. But again, he was falsely accused of being MS-13 gang member, and he was sent to a country where he had a protection order not to be sent to. So he had no opt-out or no opt-out, no alternative. And even as the Republican-dominated Supreme Court ordered him to return, Trump has not yet taken steps to oblige by the order. But my question is why? What does Trump gain from withholding Garcia and many other illegal immigrants despite public pressure and even the judiciary rallying against him? I have a feeling that immigration for Trump is more of a scapegoat for MAGA to sort of rally behind. The sort of notion that the American way of life and everything that the country stands for is sort of being usurped by an insidious, undocumented, and unaccounted for force is kind of an attractive narrative to a populist political base. Away from immigration, though, it seems that former Vice President and candidate Kamala Harris has made a speech this afternoon following the Trump administration's recent failures. Here is that speech.
Instead of an administration working to advance America's highest ideals, we are witnessing the wholesale abandonment of those ideals. President Trump and his administration and their allies are counting on the notion that fear can be contagious. They are counting on the notion that if they make some people afraid, it will have a chilling effect on others. But what they're overlooking, what they have overlooked, is that fear is not the only thing that's contagious. Courage is contagious.
Yeah, courtesy of ABC News there for that compilation. Yeah, I mean, as you can hear there, Kamala was quite fiery in that speech, but she really just kind of reiterated a lot of the current anti-Trump talking points without really getting into sort of serious detail. In a manner that's very politician-like, frankly. But this does seem to suggest maybe a potential political comeback that she's looking for. Very, very possible, but it's hard to say how successful she would be in that. It's also worth noting that currently the Democrats are quite unpopular in the polls. According to a CNN poll specifically, among the American public overall, the Democrat Party's favorability ranking stands at just 29%, a record low in CNN's polling dating back to 1992 and a drop of 20 points since January of 2021, when Trump exited his first term under the shadow of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The Republican Party's rating currently stands at 36%. So you may be wondering, well, why is the Democrat approval rating so low? And there's a lot of factors that you could mention, but one that I'd like to emphasize on, and what I think is the most chief, is the leadership crisis. There's no leader in the Democratic Party who sort of represents their values. So, according to the same CNN article, quote, asked in an open-ended question to name the Democratic leader they feel, quote, best reflects the core values, unquote, of the party, 10% of Democrat-aligned adults name New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 9% former Vice President Kamala Harris, 8% Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and 6% House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Another 4% each named former President Barack Obama for a third term, I suppose, and Texas Representative Jasim Crockett, with Schumer joining a handful of others at 2%. AOC and Bernie Sanders specifically have been giving a lot of speeches about Elon Musk, the cutting of government spending, especially the sort of oligarchy of the administration, which I wouldn't deny is the case. I don't know if I'd call it a full-blown oligarchy, not like, Orban's Hungary or something, but just seems to be a general, that seems to be the general theme amongst Democrat leaders right now, or prospective Democrat leaders, I should say. But anyway, that should wrap it up for this episode. And I want to thank those who gave me feedback from the first episode. I want to shout out Jonathan and his dad for listening. They gave me a lot of good feedback about the length, art style, and sound effects that they wanted included within the show. I will be working on that. I'm going to try to make it longer. I'm not quite sure how long this one is yet. And I'll try to change the art a little bit and add some sound effects so you guys know when I'm transitioning between topics. Be sure to stick around for a Sunday guest episode. This is the Future President Podcast. I am your host, Aiden, and I'll see you soon.